Shadows of the unknown. In a small town in New Hampshire, nestled amidst rolling hills and shadowy forests, a young man named Ethan returned to his childhood home. After spending years in the bustling chaos of Boston, he longed for solace and a sense of connection to the place that once felt like a sanctuary. His mother's passing had left an aching void, and returning to St. Augustine's Church, where she'd spent countless Sundays, felt like the right thing to do. Ethan wasn't particularly religious, but there was something about the quiet reverence of the church that drew him in. Its weathered stone walls and stained glass windows seemed to hold secrets of their own, whispering tales of devotion and despair. He began attending Sunday services more regularly, partly out of nostalgia and partly to combat the gnawing loneliness that seemed to follow him everywhere. One crisp autumn morning, he noticed her. She sat alone near the back of the church, her long, raven-black hair cascading over her shoulders. She had a pale complexion that seemed to glow under the soft light filtering through the stained glass. Her eyes, a piercing shade of gray, caught his for the briefest of moments, and Ethan felt an unexplainable chill run down his spine. After the service, curiosity got the better of him, and he approached her. "Hi, I'm Ethan," he said, offering a nervous smile. "I don't think I've seen you here before." She introduced herself as Lila, her voice soft, but with an almost melodic quality. She explained that she had recently moved to the area and found the church to be a comforting place. There was something enigmatic about her demeanor, a quiet sadness, perhaps, that Ethan couldn't quite place. Over the next few weeks, Ethan and Lila grew closer. They'd often talk after services, sometimes venturing into the woods behind the church to continue their conversations. Lila spoke of her love for the forest, how it felt alive in a way most people didn't understand. She avoided questions about her past, deflecting with charming but vague responses. Ethan found himself drawn to her mystery, his infatuation growing with each passing day. One evening, Lila invited Ethan to meet her at the church after dark. She said she wanted to show him something, her voice tinged with excitement. Ethan hesitated, but eventually agreed, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. When he arrived, the church was eerily quiet, its tall spires silhouetted against the full moon. Lila stood at the entrance, her figure barely visible in the dim light. She smiled, but it wasn't the warm, inviting smile Ethan had grown accustomed to. This one felt off. "Follow me," she said, her voice carrying an unsettling edge. She led him inside, past the empty pews, and toward a narrow staircase that spiraled downward. Ethan had never noticed it before. "Where does this lead?" he asked, his voice wavering. "To the crypt," she replied simply, descending without waiting for him. Ethan's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, but something compelled him to follow. The air grew colder with each step, the faint smell of damp earth filling his nostrils. The staircase opened into a small, dimly lit chamber lined with ancient stone coffins. Candles flickered along the walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. Lila stood in the center of the room, her back to him. When she turned, her eyes were no longer the piercing gray he remembered. They were completely black, voids that seemed to suck in the light around them. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice distorted, layered with something inhuman. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. Lila began to chant in a language he didn't recognize, her voice rising in intensity. The shadows on the walls grew larger, taking on grotesque shapes that writhed and twisted as if trying to break free. Desperate, Ethan turned to flee, but the staircase seemed impossibly far. He could feel the shadows closing in, their icy tendrils brushing against his skin. Just as he reached the base of the stairs, a deafening roar echoed through the crypt, and he felt himself pulled back by an unseen force. When he awoke, he was lying on the floor of the church, the first rays of dawn streaming through the stained glass windows. There was no sign of the staircase, the crypt, or Lila. Everything appeared as it always had. Ethan left St. Augustine's that morning and never returned. He moved away shortly after, unable to shake the memory of that night. Sometimes, he'd search online for any mention of Lila or strange occurrences at the church, but he found nothing. Yet, on quiet nights, when the wind howled through the trees, he could still hear her voice, soft, melodic, and haunting, calling his name. The Phantom Gas Station. The long drive through the heartland was supposed to be uneventful. Rachel and her boyfriend, Mark, were on their way back from a music festival. It had been days of dancing, loud music, and the kind of carefree fun that seemed to melt time. But now they were tired and eager to get home. The GPS promised another 4 hours of highway monotony, but first their gas gauge blinked a warning. They needed to refuel. "There's a stop about 15 minutes ahead," Rachel said, scrolling through her phone. Mark nodded, his focus on the empty road stretching out into the dark. "Perfect. Let's make it quick." The gas station loomed out of the darkness like an oasis, its old-fashioned neon sign flickering as if struggling to stay alive. It wasn't much. 2 pumps, a dimly lit convenience store, and a battered vending machine outside. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and something sour. "Weird vibe," Rachel muttered as they pulled in. Mark shrugged. "It's just an old place." While Mark started refueling, Rachel wandered into the store. The cashier behind the counter barely acknowledged her, his face shadowed under the brim of a baseball cap. The aisles were cramped, stocked with an odd mix of expired snacks and brandless canned goods. Rachel grabbed a bottle of water and a pack of gum, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet store. As she approached the counter, the cashier's head snapped up. His eyes were too wide, his smile too fixed. "Traveling late, huh?" he said, his voice raspy and low. "Yeah," Rachel replied, uneasy. "Just passing through." The cashier's smile didn't falter. "Well, you're welcome to stay a while. It gets real quiet out here." Rachel forced a laugh, paid for her items, and hurried back outside. "Let's go," she urged Mark, her voice tight. Mark nodded, finishing up at the pump. They got back into the car and pulled out onto the road. As they drove away, Rachel glanced back at the gas station. The cashier was standing outside now, watching them leave. Her stomach churned. They drove for another 20 minutes, but something felt off. The highway seemed endless, the scenery unchanging. The GPS screen flickered, then froze. Mark tapped it, frustrated. "It's probably just the signal," he said. "We'll hit another town soon." But they didn't. Instead, the same gas station appeared on the horizon. The neon sign flickered as if greeting them. "That's impossible," Rachel whispered. "We must have turned around somehow," Mark said, though his voice wavered. They pulled in again, though neither of them wanted to. The tank was somehow nearly empty again. Mark got out reluctantly, while Rachel stayed in the car, her heart pounding. She watched the store, half expecting the eerie cashier to step out again. Mark tapped on the window, startling her. "I'll be quick," he said. "No," she blurted. "Let's just leave." "We can't," Mark replied. "We need gas." He disappeared into the store. Minutes passed. Rachel's nerves stretched thin as she scanned the darkness around them. The air seemed heavier, the shadows deeper. Finally, Mark emerged, looking pale. "Let's go." They sped out of the lot, tension thick between them. "What happened in there?" Rachel asked. Mark shook his head, his knuckles white on the wheel. "The cashier, he said something weird. Said he'd seen me before. But we've never been here." Rachel's skin crawled. "We have to keep going. We can't stop again." But they did stop. Twice more, the same gas station appeared. Each time, the details grew more unsettling. The flickering signs spelled out gibberish. The lights inside the store were dimmer, the cashier's grin wider. By the third time, the pumps were dry, yet the tank somehow never emptied completely. On the fourth loop, they refused to stop. Mark pressed the accelerator, their car tearing down the endless highway. The gas gauge dipped lower and lower, but they didn't dare look back. Then the headlights caught movement ahead. A figure stood in the middle of the road, waving. It was the cashier. Mark swerved, narrowly avoiding him, but the car skidded and stalled. The engine refused to restart. As they sat in suffocating silence, the figure approached, his grin visible even in the darkness. "Told you," he said, leaning into the driver's window. You're welcome to stay. The last thing Rachel remembered was his eyes, glowing faintly as everything went black. Whispers in a desert storm. The desert is supposed to be quiet, vast, empty, and desolate. It's a place where you're meant to feel alone. But on that fateful night, the silence betrayed me. I was driving back to Phoenix after visiting a friend in Utah. It was the kind of long, lonely road trip where you're just left with your thoughts, the hum of your car, and the endless expanse of desert stretching into eternity. The drive had been uneventful until I hit Arizona's deep desert. That's when the storm rolled in. It wasn't just any storm. One moment, the night was clear, the stars so bright you could almost touch them. The next, thunderclouds devoured the sky. Lightning lit up the horizon in jagged bursts, illuminating the endless landscape of rocks and cacti. Then came the rain, sheets of it pounding against my windshield. My wipers, already temperamental, decided this was the perfect moment to die completely. I pulled over to the side of the highway, letting my hazard lights blink feebly against the storm. The nearest town was miles away, and there wasn't a soul in sight. Just me, my car, and the relentless rain. I decided to wait it out, leaning back in my seat and watching the lightning dance across the sky. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was just the rain playing tricks on my eyes. But no, there were lights, faint and flickering, moving erratically in the distance. Flashlights. 3 of them. I sat up, heart pounding. What were people doing out here in the storm, in the middle of nowhere? The lights seemed to be coming closer, bobbing and swaying as if carried by people walking toward the road. My unease grew as I realized they weren't moving in a straight line. They zigzagged wildly, almost erratically, like the people holding them were stumbling or searching. I locked my car doors and turned off the hazards, plunging myself into darkness. Maybe they hadn't noticed me. Maybe they would just keep walking. But the lights stopped. They hovered for a moment, then turned sharply in my direction. They were coming for me. Panic surged through me. My first instinct was to drive, but the rain was so heavy I could barely see the road. If I stayed, though, my mind raced. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location to the operator as I watched the lights draw closer. They moved unnaturally fast now, almost as if they were gliding across the wet desert floor. "Stay on the line," the operator urged. But before I could respond, my phone screen went black. Dead battery. The lights were nearly in my car now. Through the rain-streaked window, I could make out figures. 3 of them shrouded in darkness. They circled my car, their flashlights sweeping over the windows, the hood, the tires. I ducked low, trying to stay out of sight, but my breath fogged up the glass. Then one of them tapped on the driver's side window. I froze. The figure outside tilted its head, pressing its face closer to the glass. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, I saw it clearly. Its eyes were wrong, too wide, too dark, like endless voids. Its mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, teeth too sharp, too many. The thing tapped again, harder this time. Then the others joined in, banging on the windows, the roof, the trunk. The sound was deafening, a chaotic rhythm that drowned out even the thunder. "Leave me alone!" I screamed, slamming my hands against the steering wheel. But the banging only grew louder, more frenzied. The car shook as they pounded on it, and I was sure the windows would shatter. And then silence. I looked up. The figures were gone. The flashlights, the banging, the terrible grins. All of it had vanished as if it had never been there. The only sound was the rain, now a gentle patter against the roof. Shaking, I turned the key in the ignition. The car sputtered, coughed, and roared to life. I didn't care about the rain or the visibility anymore. I had to get out of there. I floored the gas pedal, tires skidding on the wet road as I sped into the night. I didn't stop until I reached Phoenix, collapsing into my apartment and locking every door and window. For weeks, I couldn't shake the memory of those figures. I scoured the internet, looking for explanations, ghost stories, urban legends, anything to make sense of what I'd seen. What haunts me most is this. I've driven that road countless times since, always in the safety of daylight. And every now and then, when the sun hits the horizon just right, I swear I see 3 faint lights flickering in the distance, waiting